There we are. We are live now. What's going on, guys? It is Tech Tuesday. Today is your guys' Tech Tuesday. We're going to be announcing the winner here in a little bit, but we're also going to do a little bit of rapid fire because there were so many good questions and so many good topics that we could use. But in order to go over all those topics, we got to go over to Justin Smith. Where'd he go? I don't know. Find him.
Well, I'm on the other side of the shop. I'm sorry about that. But then you get a chance to look at some of the other things that could actually be covered on your guys' suggestions. For instance, race cars getting prepped for the next race, which is in Havasu, the Martelli brothers promoted event, and maybe one of the things we could talk about in the future is clutching. The reason that we don't talk about clutching is because we don't feel like we know enough about it to be a good expert for you guys, and maybe we'll bring somebody in like Chris at KWI or a handful of others to talk about clutches. But if we end up coming over this way, there were, as Steve mentioned, so many good suggestions, you guys, for the feed today, and a lot of them we are going to touch upon later, as in we are going to do a full feed on a lot of your suggestions, and we'll give you credit when we get to it. But for now, let's go ahead and kind of rapid fire through about 15 or 20 of your suggestions. We'll touch on it real quick and tell you why we didn't do it. Mitch, you're first. What do you got?
Taryn's Bunny Grooming, pre/post-trip chassis/suspension inspection.
So one of the reasons we didn't do that one is because we'd have to have a couple different cars here, because we talked about Razor, Polaris only. Then all the Can-Am guys are going like, what do I do? So we needed a few more days on that to get different vehicles in here that we could show you what to do. But in general, you want to make sure you jack the car up, shake the wheels all different directions, looking for wheel bearing problems. You're looking for rear radius rods worn out, front steering components, control arm bushings. Things like that are always a number one. You want to inspect the clutch every single year, maybe repair blown or worn out parts, make sure the tuning's right, you don't have belt temps. That's just a general overview. Next. Steve.
We've got from JW_PNW22. I know you've talked about it before, but how about a 64 to 72 conversion? Or at least tell me what video it was, because I can't find it for the life of me.
You know what? I don't even know that we titled it that way, the right way, because that was back when Chase would choose whatever title he freaking wanted. He probably said pink teddy bears on the title. So look that one up, you probably find it. Short version. 64 to 72 is not easy. We don't recommend it. It's a lot of money. You have to buy shocks. You can't use the same axles or CVs. A lot of things are very expensive. It's not cheap to do. Certainly it's more money than just buying a 72 to begin with. But HCR has a 64 to 72 conversion that uses the factory original 64 shocks, and that'll save you a lot of money. So look them up real quick. Mitch.
Holmes. How installing upgraded suspension parts, long travel kits affect your spring rates?
It depends on the long travel, because a lot of long travel kits use the factory location for all of the shock mounts, which means there's typically more leverage on the system, which requires a little bit more valving and a little bit more spring rate. But some manufacturers relocate that shock mount either outward on the upper mount or stock mount location and kick it out a little bit further on the arm, which means it doesn't affect the system very much. So it depends on the kit. We might cover that one later. Steve.
Am I Chili Willy or Cyborg Pirate?
Chili Willy.
Chili Willy! It's got exclamation marks, so I feel you gotta yell it. Race radio communication setup. Helmet, speaker, mic setup, in-car communication, base camp radio setup. That wasn't really a question, that was more statements.
Yeah, I think he's telling everybody what to do.
I know, jeez.
In one short word, PCI race radios. That's actually 3 words, sorry, I think. In 3 short words, PCI.
PCI.
Letters, whatever. Okay, so call PCI, they'll get you set up. That's what we use in everything we have. You're looking at a radio, intercom, our helmet systems. We use kind of a custom earpiece that's a cup system, so you don't have the outside noise. Base camp stuff, 50 watt or 100 watt base radios, mic, tall antenna. That'll cover everything you have. And all that stuff can be linked with GoPro so you can record all your conversations. Mitch.
Cyborg Pirate, when and how often is the service and rebuild time frame for the suspension and shocks? Where items to be aware of, signs and symptoms of suspension that needs attention before scheduled maintenance.
Okay, so again, we wanted to have more vehicles here than just one manufacturer to cover that subject, and we will do that in the future. Shocks, we recommend 2,500 to 3,500 hard miles between services. arms, suspension, pivot points, I look at it as much as possible. Honestly, I'd be jacking the car up every 500 miles and looking at it so you catch things early. Steve.
He's got everything of ours too. He's a really good customer.
We're going to do that subject, just so you know, in the future.
Mike DP7, car prep for riding season. Things to look at, replace yearly, and the main things that you would break during the season that you should keep spares of on trips.
So same subject as the last one. I'm not going to cover it again, but we will cover that in depth coming up soon. Mitch.
John Niemi 856, system or components you use for filming and recording conversations throughout the race. Would love to know how to have 3 different cameras recording from different spots on the car and have the audio tied in also.
So that's a good question for Josh. Would you like to answer that one?
Here, Josh, let's see that.
I don't want to be on. I'll talk behind.
I'll turn it around.
We have 4 GoPros set up.
Josh, they can't hear you. Here.
Don't like doing this, but here we go. We run 4 GoPros. They're all the new 9s. And then also there's a connector from PCI. There's a connector from PCI that hooks into their audio system and their communication in their helmets. That's another PCI question. There you go.
It's so funny. He freezes up in front of the camera. That's great.
Stay back here.
All right. A lot of work. It takes a special individual to make that happen, that's for sure. Steve, you got more?
Yeah, Joe Vega 31, driving techniques, how to read terrain, when to accelerate, brake, or just brace yourself and commit to it.
That is so complicated. It really is, because everybody's style is different. I'll tell you this, if it's racing, then you have to be 100% floored or 100% on the brakes. Otherwise, you're going to get passed by 30 other guys. It's that kind of a deal. Now, dunes, trail, everything's got different style. So we're going to have to cover that on another feed. It's quite involved. So, Mitch.
ABB 80, when looking to buy a UTV, your guys' expert opinion on what type of unit to purchase based on driving style and terrain. Maybe some pros and cons to each style unit.
So if you want to see the only video that we've ever done on what UTV to buy, then look up what UTV to buy. It's a couple years old, so it's not new models, but that'll give you a little bit of info. The reason we didn't do that, great subject, is because we're going to do that soon. We're trying to wait for the new models to get dropped and we can have them physically in front of us. So sometime in November or December, maybe as late as January. But we'll have 10 cars here. We'll go through all of them, and that'll be one to watch. I think the last one was pretty. It was pretty well received. We pissed a few people off, but we made a lot of people happy too. So we must be doing something good.
That's about like 500,000 views.
500,000 views on that. Well, it's had a few years, but still, let's or a year and a half. We'll do another one. We just need a lot of prep with that. We need every vehicle here. Steve.
From B Wild 02, shock suspension adjustments and maintenance recommendations for dune season.
So dunes, or really any season that you guys are starting up, trail, mud, whatever it is, make sure you don't have any leaky shocks. Make sure that the car is sitting flat and level as opposed to leaning on one side. That's a sign of having low nitrogen pressure in 1 or 2 of the shocks, that it might be leaning or ride heights are off. And make sure that they're clean. Obviously, if you put it away, and you're just coming out for the season, hopefully you cleaned it before you put it away. If you've got 2,500 to 3,500 miles on them, then get them freshened up. Shocks should be rebuilt every once in a while. And if you do it with us, if you're already a customer of ours, you get all the upgrades for the setup at the same time for free. So that's it. We're gonna. If you're already our customer. Updates, sorry.
No, I just want to.
If you're already our shock customer, when we do the rebuilds on your stuff or freshen it up, you get all of the updates for free. That's different than an upgrade, because there's certain parts you can buy on the inside of the shock. Mitch.
Desert Lejos? Sorry, I don't know if I messed that up or not, but talk about the engineering behind the design of your products. How do you go from problem X to solution Y without using try again, especially when you've had to modify your original design?
So, we are going to do that. It's an excellent idea, and when we do it, we'll give you credit and send you some swag. But with 1 day notice, what we really wanted to do is show you some of the programs that we use when we are designing parts, some of the testing that we throw them through, some of the test programs that we do, and some of the fixturing designs that go into manufacturing a part before you do production. We need some time to do that one properly, but it's a great idea and we're going to do it. Steve.
KDub1333. Preseason weekend warrior car prep. Oh, it's going to be a car prep question again. So we'll go over the car prep.
Yeah, we're going to do a feed for that.
Jay Hups, run down on the 22 models and improvements needed to them. That's going to be the same thing.
We will do that review again. We want every model in front of you, so it takes some effort, and we have to have the models out there to do it. Steve.
Mitchie, they're asking for it. Let's see the haircut, bud.
The haircut?
Everyone's asking. Let's see it.
Oh, look at that. That's pretty sweet.
I was gonna, stand
Was
it
this
up.
this weekend you did it?
Yeah.
Whoa.
It was a full-blown mohawk.
Anybody have any mousse?
We could stand it up.
Have a 3M interior
Yeah, I
lube?
said, we got any Molly lube or anything?
I say we go for it, Mitch.
Just full Molly.
The rest of the feed, hat off, and we'll spike it up.
I'll spike it for Thursday. How about
They
that?
said, hell yeah, brother.
We'll spike it for Thursday.
All right, Thursday it is. Tune in, you guys. What do you got next? Next one. You can still. All right, what do you got?
Ragnar, if setting ride height for shock performance versus clearance, where in the shock stroke should the shocks be at? 80/20 with 80% of stroke length for up travel and 20% for down, 50/50, etc.
Every shock is different because bypass shocks are very sensitive to where the piston sits in the stroke. So bypasses with factory tubes are probably going to be in the 60/40 range, which is 60% of the shaft already in the shock or compressed and 40% droop. 50/50 on shocks, again, it's car specific. We could probably do a whole feed on that, but like our race car, we set pretty low, and we probably have more like 70% ins compressed, and the shock shaft only 30% showing, which means that we have way more droop from ride height out than most of the play cars. But we'll cover that subject. Good idea. Steve.
Greg451. How about Ackerman steering geometry? How important is it for desert racing? Which side-by-side got it right, and how can it be improved to turn the car?
So very good technical subject, and we should be spending the whole 45 minutes on that on a board. So we are going to do that, and we'll give you some swag when we do. But very quickly, Ackerman is the geometry, the process of creating tie rod geometry to where when you turn the wheel, it doesn't turn exactly the same, left tire to right tire. If you turn to the left, this one turns more. If you turn to the right, the inside one turns more, so that it actually follows an arc in one large, the arc of the inside tire is on exactly the same point that it needs to be from a center line, from a center position. The outside tire, to do the same thing, turns less. How that affects off-road is quite involved, and we'll do a full thing on it. That's a good one. Mitch.
Dennis Rozek, any of your involvement with helping the OEMs with suspension design and overview of what goes into the suspension/overall design process for a new machine?
So we have been approached. We choose not to. The reason is if we would rather have fixes and improvements for the factory designs than throw all of our effort into one and have it unimprovable, if that makes sense. That's the same reason why we don't do a shock therapy edition with manufacturers, which has been something that's been discussed. Because if a shock therapy edition comes out, we're not going to be doing any shocks on that one, right? For the most part. So we feel like we're better off improving what's out there. Steve.
Agreed. Simply Josh 13. Can-Am X3 Smart Shock tuning with shock therapy.
Well, you can answer that. We have it.
Yeah, we got it. Call into the shop.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about what it is, but that's again, we're going to take shock apart and show you some of the stuff that we do. But in general, we've got internals, we've got tube mods, we've got spring to go with it, and a whole bunch of other stuff.
Yeah, we got a bunch of other accessories too.
Yeah. Next.
BLX, temperature and altitude of shocks, what change does it make and how can it affect your suspension from Canadian winter like -22 degrees to desert like temps?
So altitude is not much of a change because the shock has nitrogen pressure in it, about 200 PSI, and that kind of negates, thin air, it negates altitude effect on a shock. There'll be more effect to you and your brain than there is on the shock at altitude. Now, temperature is if the shock is negative 22 up to 100 degrees. It's going to be on the stiffer side than normal. Anything over 100 and anything under 300 degrees, it's going to run and work pretty much the same. Now, that's assuming that we have done the shock work and it has our oil in it. But if we're talking about factory oil, it is more susceptible to temperature changes. And you might find that it's brick stiff at negative 22, rides okay at 150, and completely soft at 250. That's because the oil doesn't like the change in temp factory-wise, which is cheaper oil. But like I said, if we have our stuff, you're not going to see much change. As soon as you go and drive it, even if it's negative 22 outside, the shocks probably get 100, 120 degrees. If you run it hard enough, then it'll work fine. So factory, yeah, there's a big difference. Once we've done the work, not much.
Mr. Sparkles, clutching. It seems to be some big, scary subject. How is the difference in primary and secondary? How do springs and weights change things?
So, as I said when we started this, I think that clutching is something that we should cover on a feed. Everybody wants to know more about it. The reason that we haven't is because we don't feel like we're a good enough expert at it to give you good information. We want to bring in the clutch experts and have them tell you the right way, but that things work. But I will tell you in the most general terms possible that a primary clutch is going to be responsible for initial engine RPM on the flash. It's also going to be responsible for, say, 0 to 30 or 40 miles an hour. A secondary clutch is kind of responsible for RPM as well, but once you are moving, how it engages through helix and how the RPM is kept, kind of like a 10-speed, whether it's in first through 10th gear, changes everything. And the secondary controls a good portion of like 45 mile an hour and up. And primary, how it flashes up to 40, and secondary, how it controls RPM and overlap into the secondary and then fully locked. There's the magic, because if you get it wrong just a little bit, you get belt temp, and you get belt temp, you blow stuff up. So we will cover that with experts. Don't take what I've said as the gospel, okay? We don't know what we're doing. If we did, we would never be tuning clutches every single day of our life in the race car. Next.
Old and Hyper.
Old and Hyper?
Yep. Nice Rockwell tester. What are you making?
We are actually not making anything with that Rockwell tester. What we do is we check stuff. So when we make parts, yes, we do check and make sure that when we get our parts back from heat treat that they are accurate. But another thing that we do mostly with that Rockwell tester is we check parts that come off the race car. So when trannies come out of it, we'll check them after they've been run for 3,000 miles and see what all the gears are doing. We'll check shock parts, we'll check hardware. When new parts come in from someplace else, we'll check them too. We don't usually trust what they say. If they say it's 45 Rockwell, we're going to check it. So it's more of a problem preventer here inside what we do for prep on the race car.
And we had a video last week or 2 weeks ago that we did the Rockwell test.
Yeah, once you look up wheel studs, or I think it was titled, was it problems at Laughlin or whatever? It was wheel studs and hardness, something like that, 2 or 3 videos ago. Check that out.
Yeah. From Vincent Ocknard, alignment.
So again, very complicated. We'll do a full feed on that one, but I will tell you that most UTVs prefer to have a 1/4 inch towed in the front, 1/4 inch towed in the back if you have toe adjustment in the rear. And if you don't, then you have nothing you can do except for radius rods, which might be camber. Camber is going to be from 0 to -1 degree. Somewhere in that range is a good place to start. Otherwise, we're going to do full subject. Next.
No, it's Mitch, but there's just
Mitch's
funny stuff going on here.
Perfect. Hartman 21, tricks and tips for dune riding / camping, essentials for what to bring on rides and for camping.
Huge subject. We'll do a feed on that. I mean, basically the reason why we have all your stuff typed up is because we're going to use it as we're going to check stuff off as we do them coming up, because they're great ideas. Steve. What do you got?
Pearson Nate, in your suspension setup / clicker adjustments, you talked a lot about the rear dampening. What is your process to get the front end dialed? Are you looking for converting stability, or does that come from a sway bar? How does too much rebound in the front affect the handling in the rear? I would assume you would start all the way soft on the front clickers and add until it doesn't bottom out.
Huge subject, right, Steve?
Man.
And worthy of its own show.
Yes.
That one, I can't even touch on one of your questions without getting 10 minutes deep into that one. So we're going to do a full show on it, okay? Good question. Mitch?
Hydro Man Eddie, Maverick X3 22 clutch differences from 21. That can probably be tied into like something.
What was that? It was Can-Am clutch?
X3
21 to 23?
22 clutch differences from 21.
How about we do a full clutch episode and we cover that as well. We'll have the clutch experts in here, but we were not going to do it until Can-Am releases that at the end of October, because we actually want that new clutch in front of you so we can show you the difference. We have every other clutch made except for that 22. When we get it, we'll do it. Steve?
Bri Johnson, what is your recommended vehicle break-in procedure? What to do while waiting for your specific vehicle's dual rate spring kit to arrive on Shock Therapy's website?
So break-in, well, if you're talking about the engine, then everybody's got their own way to do that. I would follow the factory so that you don't piss them off on warranty stuff. But I mean, literally, we just put a brand new engine through a couple heat cycles, warm it up, shut it down, warm it up, shut it down, and then frickin' pin it. Rev limiter for the rest of its life. That's pretty much how we run, race car stuff. But, do what you want. Shock-wise, you don't have to break in shocks. Arms, everything else, you don't have to break them in. Sometimes you have to break in brake pads, but not on the factory stuff, from what I understand. We don't, and they work fine. Mitch.
Ryan Van Valkenburg, can we go over Tony's amazing wire setup on Justin's car and the ins and outs of the AIM dash system?
So, Josh, why don't you come over here real quick? And you guys can see just a hair of what Tony's got going on, which is, unless you're right up in it, it's hard to see. But it's super, super tight, super clean. Everything is marked and labeled. But we're only showing you just 2 pieces out of 50 pieces in the car. We've got power distribution modules that control everything in dash and recording systems. It's a good subject idea that requires a full episode, so we'll get back to that later. Something good, Steve?
There's just a bunch of disrespect going on.
Oh yeah,
but they do. So we got a bunch of people asking, when are the speed tube socks never coming out? And then are they dual rate? How often should I change my socks? They never sag, I'll tell you that.
Well, you might want to use that as a segue into your promotion for the rest of the week.
We can, yes. But there's one more question.
One more, okay.
Body roll.
That's it, body roll.
I got a lot of it, so
Vehicle body roll is 3 things. 1, shock valving, which is the least important of the control factors. 2, spring rates, which is the second most important. And 3rd, anti-sway bar choice, stiffness, or rate. We choose to have the sway bar control body roll because we want to allow ourselves spring and shock to be tunable, plush, do the rest of its job over rough stuff so that you get a ride quality that's awesome, and have the sway bar stop you from having body roll. As soon as you have the shock internals control body roll, it's going to get stiff. As soon as you ask the spring to control most of the body roll, typically it's going to get stiff. So we try to get away from that and have sway bars control that. That'll answer that one. We might do sway bar video in the future too, but that's it. Was that your last one?
You skipped one.
I skipped one or so.
Okay, cool. Back to tube socks. Steve,
So-
what is the happening here?
They will be released on Thursday after the live feed. We will also be announcing the winners for our giveaway. The raffle that we did, we'll be announcing the 4 winners for that. But they will be live on the website after the live feed on Thursday.
I believe that you've got some other things you're releasing too. There's going to be a video.
Oh yeah,
and what
stay
else?
tuned. Stay
What else you got,
tuned.
Steve?
Oh, is it done? Oh, Josh says it's done. So the video will be releasing. The socks will be not dropping, coming to you soon. And yeah, that's what I got.
That is the worst coil spring ever.
That's coil bind.
Yeah,
That's
that's I don't know. That's like "Don't Tread on Me." I think is going to be that logo here in a second. Where is the cleaning device, otherwise known as a rag?
Blame that one on Jacob.
Okay, so we'll get to it here in a minute. Now, back to the subject and the person that won this feed. I'm going to let Steve do that announcement so I can actually write some more stuff down.
All right, the winner was Toby Wagner. His question was springs, spring rates, differences in types of springs, and what to expect when upgrading springs. Just ordered a spring kit and would be interested in the science behind the improvement. Also, what to look for and how to set up shocks after doing a spring kit. What to change when a car reacts a certain way.
That is a very, very, very good question, and it happens to be the one that won. Did you tell everybody who that was?
I
Steve?
did. His name is Toby.
One more time.
Toby Wagner, come to the front of the stage, sir.
Hey, you know what? I think that you sounded like the announcer for Price is Right.
You are
when
welcome.
you did that whole thing.
Yeah.
Come on down.
Come on down.
And so I think that we might have you do another impression on the next thing that you say. So you guys,
I'm
who are
done
out
talking.
there, come up with the voice you want Steve to use on the next thing he talks about. In the meantime, I'm going to go through some spring stuff. You have quite a few things that we wrote down on the notes.
Yes.
Right? So first,
Stock springs.
Stock springs, the difference about them, why people don't, I guess, like them, or why are they the way that they are, right? Well, there's a few things. Stock springs tend to be lesser quality than some of the aftermarket springs, for instance, the springs that we have. That has to do with material that they're built from, whether they're heat treated or not, whether they're cycled after the fact or not, whether they're ground flat or not, and the final coating, whether it's powder coat, the temperature that's done. Also, the overall design, whether it's a single spring, whether it's a dual spring with an upper that's fully compressed, whether it's dual spring with crossover, which is very rare factory, or triple rate, which would be like the rear of a factory Can-Am, which technically isn't triple rate because the upper is compressed at all times. So it's basically what's called a helper spring. I'll go into that a little bit more when we get into rates. Okay, but quality of the spring. Remember, manufacturers have to keep that thing at 30 grand or less, otherwise people are going to flip out. And the only way you can do that is to save $1 a piece, $1 a spring times 50,000 springs, or $2 here and there on the car. The manufacturers have a tough job. We shouldn't talk any smack about them having less expensive stuff on a vehicle that is very inexpensive. What's that?
The J-turn.
That's true. So another thing when it comes to factory springs, the factories has a ton of requirements to go through for government testing. One's called a J-turn, which is 25 miles an hour on asphalt, car set up exactly the way it's going to be sold to you. Grab the wheel, full lock, and if it picks up one tire, then it fails. So a lot of times with not enough sway bar on the car, and maybe the spring rates the way you would want them to be, or the shock a little bit on the soft side, they'll have too much body roll and fail that test. So the factory will then stiffen up the spring package to keep it from having a tire pickup. And that's where you see a lot of the spring designs on new UTVs. Single spring, almost fully compressed upper, so that when you get into a corner, it compresses the upper spring, sits on the lower, stiffer spring, and stops it from body rolling and failing that test. So a lot of what you see is because of government testing combined with less expensive ways to do things. A small upper spring is very inexpensive compared to a full length one. So it's a cheaper option to pass that test. Quality of spring, big deal, big deal. That's actually why people see factory springs sagging and settling over time, is because of the quality of material. There is a pile of material to choose from. For instance, what we use is the highest quality material known to man when it comes to coil spring manufacturing. It's a carbon steel with high silicon content, and puts up with cycle rates in the millions, meaning that it can compress and extend millions and millions of times without losing or retaining its original rate and size. That's very important to us, so we spend the money on the material to get that. Another thing when it comes to quality of spring and what we do compared to factory, or really anyone else that's on the market, is when the spring is made and ground and sits on a flat plate, the angle of the spring, how far it sits off, like Leaning Tower of Pisa, is a quality control issue that we spell out as 3 degrees or less. Most springs, most aftermarket springs that I can name 10 manufacturers right now, are more than 5 degrees. So if the spring's already not straight, well, that translates to going on your shock and having a bow. So ours are designed to be the straightest. Other things and criteria that we have on springs is 2% or less when it comes to how close the spring rate actually is to what's desired. So if we're asking for a 200-pound spring, it can't be off more than 2%. Okay, that's 4 pounds, right? Is my math right on that? 10% would be 20, 2, 4, yeah. Yeah, so a 200-pound spring from us is gonna be 4 pounds one way or the other or less. Okay, typical quality of spring in rates is 5 to 7%. So you might see a 200-pound spring be 10 or 15 pounds off. And that kind of sucks when you're trying to buy a 275 or a 300. Well, a 300 might be a 275, and it would be perfectly fine and pass their quality control on other aftermarket manufacturers' springs. Another process in our spring manufacture is that our springs are not heated up to glowing red and wrapped around a die and to give you a spring and then heat treated after the fact. Ours are actually cold wound, which means it's wound without heat, which means it does not have to be heat treated, which also means that they last longer that way and they do not have any scale on the outside of the spring, which gives you a rough finish when it's powder coated. So our springs are smooth at all times. They don't have flaking in that scale, and they haven't had to have been going through a heat treat process, which creates other issues, and a normalization and a whole checking and a million things that happen there. What else did I miss on my list of
less than 3 degrees?
I did that.
You did that.
Yes.
And then acid dip, bead blasted, powder coat.
So a lot of spring manufacturers, aftermarket manufacturers, will take their springs right out of heat treat and they'll powder coat it. Well, that flakes off pretty easy and it gets rust through and a bunch of stuff. So ours, in our process, they are acid dipped, completely cleaned. They're bead blasted, which also adds to the longevity of the spring, believe it or not, and then powder coated with really high quality powder. And they're powder coated under 400 degrees so that you don't lose spring rates up in the 600-700 degree range. So that's very important. That's another reason why we don't warranty our springs if you've powder coated them, because a lot of powder coaters will either bake it too hot, which ruins the rate, or they will burn the powder off prior to repowdering it, and that is also too much heat. Ruins the spring, we can't back it up. Other stuff.
You have -0 plus 20 thou. So tolerance.
In tolerance of size of the spring, our tolerances are super tight. Most manufacturers are plus or minus 60 thousandths of an inch. So the diameter could be smaller or larger by 60 thou. Well, we have a minus tolerance of 0. It cannot be under what we spec. It can be over by 20 to 25 thousandths. So our overage is half of what most people's under and over tolerance is. So the springs are exact every single time, and that makes for a good fit. If the spring is tight on the shock divider or spring divider or on the lower spring perch, has a tendency to bow less. Even though bowing is almost impossible to stop, when the spring is higher quality, you have less of it. More, Steve.
So not necessarily on that, but how we design spring kits per car, not per spring that's in.
Okay, so a lot of aftermarket manufacturers might have, say, a 375 diameter spring, which is 3 3/4 inch diameter, and a 300-pound rate on the shelf. Well, they'll do whatever it takes to design a spring kit, say, for your Can-Am X3, which requires a large diameter spring in the rear, to use what they have on the shelf, a 375, 300, 400, 500, doesn't matter what the poundage is, but whatever they already make or whatever they already have in stock. We do not do that. We go at that vehicle to get the spring rates that are spot on for everybody's use, If that means that we have to make a 275 or a 325 or a 410, then we're going to make it. Also, we're not going to use a diameter that's on the shelf if a better diameter works. So we will actually make our own springs, for instance, on the back of a Can-Am that is a 355 diameter spring. Well, maybe not on the Can-Am, but on a larger bypass diameter shock, we have made springs that are 355 instead of 375, so that you don't get to adapters and things to make the 375 fit. That's why sometimes when you buy spring kits from other people, it comes with a bunch of adapters. It's because they're using a spring they already had, which means it's not the right one for exactly what that car might need. So we go about it differently. We build what's necessary. We don't use what's on the shelf because we're forced to. Sometimes we do because we luck out, but most of the time we make what's needed. Steve?
Heavier upper rate as opposed to the lower.
So let's talk about dual rates. How far are we into this? Am I just getting way too long into this? Because I'll slow it down. 35? All right. Springs. So back to my crappy spring design drawing. Let's do single spring. Spring divider. And an upper.
It's beautiful.
That's
Not
gorgeous.
too bad. A little better than the tread on me snake from earlier. So if you've got a single spring on the shock, and let's just say that that is a 300 pounder, that means with one spring, then you have 300 pounds of spring rate for every inch that you compress that spring. So it's 300 pounds the first inch, it's 600 pounds total tension, another 300 pounds at 2 inches, 900 pounds at 3 inches of compression. It's linear. It's the same amount every single inch, added on and on and on. That, if you're sitting on 300 pounds at all times, is probably going to be pretty stiff because you have 300 pounds times 4. You're sitting on top of 1,600 pounds. Every inch you compress it. Tends to be stiff and rocks and chop and chatter and the beginning of whoops and things like that. That's pretty much where you're at factory because the factory uppers tend to be compressed all the way. You're kind of sitting on the stiff spring. Dual rate spring. Lose the single, run a spring divider and an upper spring. Let's just say that that is a 300 pound spring. Now, Mitch, hopefully you got a calculator on your phone because I'm going to ask you to do the math because I did not do this in advance. You can grab that. So when you run a 300 pound spring over another 300 pound spring, I know what the math is and I'll tell you, and I also know what the answer is on this one. When we get into complicated springs, I'm going to have Mitch do it, all right? So it is the upper spring times the lower divided by upper minus the lower. In this case, that would be 300 times 300 divided by 300. No, added, sorry.
Yeah.
Upper and lower.
We were both looking at each other like, wait a minute.
300 plus 300. Okay, I can tell you from memory this is 150 pounds. Now, the only time that this formula actually works out to be literally half your spring rate is when the upper and the lower spring are exactly the same rates. So, when you take a 300 and you put a 300 lower and you put a 300 upper on top of it, and you put that on your vehicle, you actually get 150 pounds per inch of compression on that system. It's half of what the lower was or half of what a single 300 was. Just so happens that's how the math works out. So just by going from a single 3 to dual 3s, you'll have half the rate, which means it's going to sit lower and you have to have way more preload to get it back up. It also means that it rides softer, rides smoother, not as stiff as it was. Here's where the magic is. The upper is going to compress at some point to where you get into a crossover ring. And this crossover ring is threaded to the shock. This divider, as you compress, that divider will hit that crossover and that upper spring no longer compresses anymore. So you go from 150 pounds combined rate, negate the upper spring by hitting the crossover, into 300 pound rate. So this system right here goes from 150 to 300 as it's compressed. It's more gradual. It means that you can expect softer, smoother ride quality when you're in the combined rates, and it gives you way more spring, or potentially more spring force to stop you from bottoming out. And that lower spring is controllable through travel. You can control by adjusting the crossover when you want it to come in. Here's where a lot of people ask us a lot of questions on this stuff. What if you throw a giant spring on it, and here, Mitch, this is where I'm looking for your numbers. So what if you put a 500-pound spring over the top of a 300? Back to the math, it's 500 times 300 divided by 8, which is 500 plus. And Mitch, the answer is?
187.5.
187.5. That means that if you ran a 500-pound spring over a 300-pound spring, the combined rate that you feel at ride height is 187 pounds per inch of compression. Once the upper spring is negated by hitting the crossover, you go to 300 pounds. So just by going a heavier upper, we've changed this to 187.5 over 300. So there's nothing wrong with running a heavy upper over a lighter lower. It's just a way of getting more rate at ride height, and certain suspension geometry might require that. For instance, on the front of a Pro XP, okay, that thing has a lot of arm with a whole bunch of shock laid way in. Okay, the leverage and motion ratio on that, it's such that we need a lot more spring rate at ride height, otherwise it just compress it. You could never even throw enough preload into it to get the ride height you're looking for. So we need more rate on the initial combined rate to keep ride heights correct, and then we can change the lower to give you some bump stage control. Now we can go to let's say this is not the rates on a Pro XP, just so you guys know. We're just using round numbers and high uppers and low lowers. Hopefully that explains some of the tunability that you can throw at this. Now in trophy trucks with external bypass shocks and 2 shocks per corner, you can go a lot lighter on the upper. You might do a 100-pound upper over a 300 or 150 over a 300. The split between them is going to be a really wide range. That's because you've got a lot more zone control with a bypass and a coilover doing other things. Typically coilovers control like ride high, small chop to whoops, and then bypass shocks, external bypasses, control all the big hits, giant whoops and big jump landings. That's how external bypasses on like a big trophy truck with multiple shocks work. That's completely different when it's one shock, even though it's a bypass. We have to manage the spring kits accordingly. Notes.
What does the spring kit give you?
Spring kit, I think I mentioned it, but I'll do it again. Our dual rate spring kit is going to give you a softer, more plush ride at ride height than through the small chop and chatter, especially up to small whoops. And then it'll give you more bump stage resistance. When you jump it, land it, big hits, giant whoops, you're gonna have more stiffness so it won't bottom out. And the gradual nature that transitions from one to the other is really nice. You won't even notice the change between the plush section of the spring kit to the stiff one. Basically everything that people want. They want it softer, smoother, and not bottom out. You're gonna get all of that. Now, until you get inside the shock, it won't be perfect. It's just gonna be a ton better than the way it was. But once you get inside the shock, then that's the home run, because now we can control the inside perfectly with that spring kit, and you get a giant change for the better again. Steve.
That's it.
What?
That's all of our notes, man. That's it.
And I did it all. I did that in less than 45 minutes.
Done did it.
That was like
Pretty good.
speedy spring conversation.
There were a couple people, though, that were confused on
About
what you were
what?
talking about, because they were thinking you were saying that the socks would fit a 300-pound guy. They were thinking you were talking about socks, not rates. So a lot of people were very confused in the comments. But people want to see your socks, Justin. And I say, what socks?
I got tiny ass black socks. I mean, hey, and Steve's the one that talked me into those. So you can complain to him.
I did.
They used to be ankle high white, and white shoe. But he talked me in. He changed.
I got him.
Yeah, converted. I don't think you're going to see me in tube socks every single day. Not going to happen. But I'll do it for special occasions like the launch of your sock line, sir.
Oh, thank you,
Thursday.
Justin. Awesome.
And videos to follow.
Yes.
I think that we might actually do videos with a tube sock theme. How socks can improve your life. Because they should. They should improve everyone's life. Don't you think, Mitch? No?
I don't wear tube socks, so I don't know, but yeah.
Support is what somebody asked. Will the tube socks give you proper support? Yes. They'll talk to you late at night. If you want to lay on the couch and stuff, you've got a bad day, they'll help you through that. I think financially that Tube Socks will give you some support as well. Most people think that dude's got Tube Socks on now. He's probably got to be super confident. You might get ahead in the world by actually having Tube Socks. So I'm thinking a lot of support, absolutely, with Tube Socks. Steve?
Yeah, I agree. I need a lot of support, which is why I always wear Tube Socks.
You guys got any questions that we can bang out really quick? Otherwise, I think I'm going to lose my voice. I've been talking too much.
I got one question on Facebook.
Thank you.
Ephraim Pina, how far can you adjust the ride height on stock shocks before going to full spring kit from you guys?
Once you throw more than about an inch and a half of preload in it, you're not going to gain anything after that. You're just going to be chasing the fact that the springs are compressing too much. So I think from a preload standpoint, inch and a half, then you're done. Ride height standpoint, trying to raise it up more than 2 inches, then you're done. Somewhere around there. Steve, you good?
I'm good. Just a couple people asking about the raffle. We will be announcing the raffle winners on Thursday.
So you have Tube Socks,
and raffle. It's just going to be a fun day giveaway. And remember, the winner for today was Toby Wagner.
Toby, thank you very much.
Thanks, Tobes.
So Josh, you're probably going to contact him or he'll get you first. But we'll get all your sizes and colors that you prefer. We'll load up your closet, and you'll be the coolest guy in your camp. As another fashionista would say with his Tube Socks to every single day, setting the fashion trend at Shock Therapy, I think it's time that you take us out, sir.
All right, guys, if you're looking to buy anything off the website, including Tube Socks, wait till Thursday, but visit the website, www.shocktherapyusa.com, or if you have any questions, please call in at 623-217-4959.